Welcome, dear listener. Hold a small lamp to the dark and listen as a quiet street of stone settles under the blue shoulder of a mountain. Tonight, we walk into Pompeii, where ash once softened every sound and everyday objects kept their secrets for centuries. Who first chose this bend of the Sarno River, and what unfolded hour by hour when the sky rose like a tree in the year 79? Breathe slow, settle in, and let the city open its doors one by one. If you like drifting to sleep with gentle history, tap subscribe and give this a like so more calm stories find their way to you. We begin when night begins. Listen for a moment to the hush before a story begins. A clay lamp rests in a palm, the wick steeped in oil, the flame a small, steady breath against the evening. In the fading light, you can see the outline of a mountain beyond the rooftops, a dark shoulder that keeps its own counsel. Where did this city come from? Tucked beside a slow river and the long curve of the bay. Who first chose this bend in the water, and what did they hear at night besides frogs and the whisper of reeds? Why did people keep coming back to this ground, speaking different tongues, leaving new walls and new ways, and yet still calling it home? How does a place gather identities like layers of paint, each one showing through the next when the sun swings low? And when Rome arrives with its tidy street lines and its laws and its fountains, what changes and what stays exactly the same, as ordinary as bread and as reliable as a gate's wooden bar? The answers gather like neighbors around a table, and we will set them out in a gentle row. Look first at the land, because the land usually decides. The soil here is dark and generous, made of ash and stone ground to powder long before anyone wrote the date. It holds water well. Grapes like it. Olive trees approve. You can draw a simple map in your mind. To one side, the Bay of Naples, a long blue saucer that catches light even on quieter days. To another, the Sarno River, broad in its lower course, shallow at times, but steady enough to carry a small boat with jars of oil, sacks of grain, bundles of dyed cloth. A soft seam of marsh and shore lies where river meets sea, a place that changes its look each century as sand drifts and currents argue. The mountain watches. Today, you know its name, and you know what it can become. But for most of the city's life, it is simply a presence, a shape that tells both weather and direction, a compass you do not have to think about. In very early days, people pass through and stay a while. They make hearths from small rounded stones. They leave bits of pottery that catch a modern eye because the clay is simple and because a fingertip once pressed a pattern along the rim. It is not yet a city. It is a place with promise. The promise is in the water, in the fields, and in the way you can stand on a low ridge and watch the rivers bend, like a parent watching a child cross a courtyard. When the sea lies quiet, a breeze brings a faint salt smell. When the weather shifts, the plain smells like damp straw. This is how it begins, not with trumpets, just with small good reasons. As the centuries move, new people arrive in Campania, some from nearby hills, others from across the sea. Greek sailors come to nearby shores and build towns with straight streets and temples that love the sun. Etruscans leave their trace in trade and script and in the confidence of a culture that admires skill. The people living here speak Oscan, a language that feels sturdy when you say it aloud. The name of the town that grows in this place likely carries that sound, though its exact roots sit behind a light fog that historians gently argue about. What is clear is the character of the early town. It sits on a rise beyond the floodplain, close enough to the water to work it, high enough to feel safe when the river swells. Low walls of tufa stone appear, then stronger defenses. Gates mark the ways in, and the gates remember names that point to the world around the town. There is a gate for the road to Herculaneum, and one for Nola, and one for Nocera, and one that listens to the sea. Each gate keeps the same rhythm day after day. Open, watch, close. You can imagine the wooden beam that slides into its bracket with a clack in the evening, the sound you hear again and again until it tells your body it is time to sleep. The streets begin to settle into a plan. They are not yet the tight grid you may imagine later, but they know what they are doing. They walk toward the forum because a human town, very quickly, makes a place to meet. The forum is not grand in the beginning. It is simply the right space, a clearing of use, flanked by buildings that slowly learn to be official. A temple joins because worship lives beside buying and selling without any fuss. Temples love the corners and the slightly higher places where steps can gather a bit of dry dust. There is a temple to Apollo where you feel Greek hands in the shape of the columns, and there is a Doric presence on a triangular height where you can look down over the city like a shepherd counting sheep. It is a good mix. It says the town knows people come from different paths and have different ways of making a reverent gesture. Across the 4th and 3rd centuries before the Common Era, a broader power grows in these hills. The Samnites move and settle and shape. They speak a language close to the city's own sound. Their influence stiffens the bones of the town. Houses learn to new arrangements, with rooms around central spaces and the taste for courtyards open to the sky. Walls become confident. Fortifications hug the perimeter with a kind of plain poetry. They are not ornate. They do not need to be. They are there to be walked along, to be leaned on by someone watching the road, to be repaired when winter teases them apart. In this time, the city feels both local and connected. Neighbors argue about grain prices in the morning and hear news from a messenger by evening. A boy learns the trick of jumping the stepping stones at a wet crossing. A girl learns to carry a clay jar without spilling, the rim warm against her forearm where the sun has touched it. Then Rome rises in a way that is hard to ignore. At first, the relationship is a web of alliances and agreements, as if two houses on the same street share tools and gossip in a wary smile. The city becomes a socius, a partner that sends men and pays dues, and in return enjoys roads and trade, and the feeling of belonging to something that is going somewhere. But belonging can turn inside out. In the social war, cities across Italy press Rome for full rights, not just the responsibilities. Pompeii ends up on the harder side of Rome's attention. When the fighting is over and Rome's system resumes its orderly breath, veterans come with their allotments and their paperwork and their sense of purpose. The city receives a new official name with a Roman rhythm, Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum. The words sound like a seal pressed into wax. The colony's dedication to Venus suits the place, gentle and confident, and a little proud of the gardens and the hearts that walk there. With colony status, the plan of the city tightens. Streets straighten where they can. The grid, That quiet machine of order clicks into place across much of the town. Insulae, blocks of houses and shops, take their final shapes, and a visitor can begin to understand the city as a set of neighborhoods the way you might understand your own town by its bakeries and benches. Fountains appear at intersections, their rims worn by hands and cups, and the small thump of a bucket set down just a little harder than necessary. You can hear water even at night, a thin silver trickle that says someone has designed a system to supply it. The aqueduct that feeds this sound crosses miles of hills from springs to the east. It makes a silent entry and divides itself with care at a structure where the pressure can be managed, as if a conductor lifts a hand and the orchestra comes softly to life. From there, the lines run out into streets and houses, into baths and basins, into the ordinary thirst of a city at work. The form grows into its role the way a person grows into a good coat, feeling right by degrees. Colonnades give rhythm to the space. The ground is laid in paving stones that hold the warmth of afternoon and sigh it out as evening arrives. Offices of civic life stand along one edge, places where accounts are kept, and decisions are argued with dignity before everyone agrees to be sensible. A basilica near the Forum opens its wide interior to morning light and the sound of footsteps receding. Markets operate as often as anyone needs them, and you can smell fresh bread and olives and a clean hint of wool. A statue may catch firelight from a passerby's lamp as he goes home at the end of the day and imagine he bows. He does not bow, of course. He is only tired and thinking of soup. All the while, life spreads along the Sarno. Most of the city's trade does not risk open waters. It follows the river's steady back and forth, from fields upstream, where grain ripens, to the marshy edge, where boats can angle toward the sea when weather allows. At the river's mouth, small facilities rise and vanish across generations, always adjusted to the river's shifting path like a net mended and mended again. Barges slide along, their hulls shallow, their cargo practical. Amphorae stand shoulder to shoulder like well-behaved guests, their pointed bases lodged in racks or soft sand, each one smelling faintly of what it last carried. Jars for wine show stains the color of late summer. Jars for oil glint when a thin smear catches sun. Work crews taste the weather and the timing, watch the tide, and tie a boat to a post with a rope that leaves a pattern on the wood. It is all very ordinary, and because it is ordinary, it is beautiful. Inside the city, houses learn to speak Roman and to keep their own accent at the same time. A typical home opens from the street into a small front space where the household greets daylight. The floor might be simple beaten earth, or a powder of ground tile folded into mortar. In grander versions, colored tesserae take over. Tiny cubes of stone arranged into patterns that love order but also love surprise. A shallow pool waits under the opening in the roof to receive rain and to mirror passing clouds. Water that gathers here is useful. It fills a jar for cooking. It washes a handful of herbs. In a quieter room beyond, a garden lifts leaves toward the sky. A private green square where afternoon heat softens into something kind. The Romans who shaped these houses also shaped the habit of writing on walls with a quick, confident hand. Names, announcements, friendly boasts, elections, recipes so brief they are more like winks. The city is starting to look and sound like itself. With colony status, comes a new sense of belonging to a wider map. The road to Herculaneum feels closer than before because milestones reassure a traveler like polite signs at a park. The road to Nola gives you a day's journey measured by the rhythm of walking and resting and walking again. The gates keep their counts. The watch sees faces he recognizes and nods, and he sees faces he does not and pays attention. The walls are not only for defense now, they are also a frame, a way of saying this is the city and this is the countryside, and both are good. Outside, fields roll out like blankets. Vine rows make long threads, their tips tied to slender sticks that look like a pencil stuck in the earth. Orchards show fig and apple and pear, each tree a person in a crowd. Turn the soil here, and it smells of iron and rain. Move your hand along a low wall, and it leaves a chalky memory on your skin. Religions braid together without drama. The old companions of Oscan worship still stand in quiet corners. Greek faces look down from pediments with that calm that outlasts arguments. Roman gods arrive like cousins visiting for a season and end up staying because the meals are good and the company is pleasant. A temple to Venus near the Forum reads like a welcome letter to the colony's new identity. It is one of those buildings that collects traces of many phases, the way a favorite cup shows tiny repair marks if you know where to look. In other pockets of the city, small shrines bloom like flowers near doorways and in courtyards. You toss a pinch of something fragrant on a little flame and breathe a scent that reminds you to be kind and to keep your promises. People have always needed prompts, even gentle ones, and the city provides them without scolding. If you stand outside the city walls and look back, the silhouette of the place shows its stages. The oldest temples sit a little apart, as if they were early farmhouses now inside the lines of a growing town. The Samnite walls are a firm belt. The Roman gates are clever and well placed. Roofs nestle where streets meet, and you can trace the main thoroughfares by the way the light slows down at each intersection at dusk. Wagons grind shallow grooves into the paving stones where traffic is heaviest, a visible memory carved by repetition. Crossing points for pedestrians lift a person above winter puddles, big stone steps with spaces that match the width of a cart's axle. A cat knows these stones and chooses them as stations in a private game. The cat is always a few steps ahead because cats tend to know where you intend to walk before you do. Trade grows. And with trade come small luxuries. Bronze knockers, shaped like dolphins, smile from doors. A jar of colored powders sits on a shelf in a room where a painter keeps his brushes wrapped in wool to keep their bristles neat. On market days, dyed cloth sleeps in folded stacks that hold sunlight like captive warmth. A maker of fish sauce stamps his amphorae with the pride of a craftsman who knows his name will travel farther than he ever will. A money changer counts out coins whose faces quietly teach geography. A barber lifts a blade that gleams and works with the care of someone moving through a narrow world where a tiny slip matters. In these details, the town turns from a map into a living place, measure by measure. The Forum is not an idea. It is the sound of sandals hurrying and then slowing because someone has just told a good story. The Roman sense of order extends to the water again and again. The aqueduct's hidden channels feed fountains with dependable pressure. At key angles, the stone of a spout grows smooth under the touch of thousands of hands. Even without looking, you can tell which fountains are most beloved by the way paths of dust arc toward them in delicate crescents. The baths, which will one day be many and varied, are already in view as projects that change the daily rhythm. A person can finish work by early afternoon and join a small society of steam and quiet talk, moving from warm to hot to cool in a ritual that rests both body and thought. Whoever designed such places understood that thoughtful warmth is better than a lecture for producing decent citizens. It is a civic idea cast as a comfortable chair. The colony's new administration brings inscriptions that line up like neat rows of notebooks. There are elections to run, and the walls announce them. There are offerings to note, and the altars keep the memory. There are building projects to dedicate to gods and to the spirit of the city, and heavy letters cut into stone hold names and titles. To read them is to hear voices. We hear a father who wants his daughter remembered for her generosity. We hear magistrates who choose to lay out money for paving and expect to be thanked as long as paving holds. We hear the pulse of a town that thinks about itself, which is one of the better signs of a healthy place. A place that does not pay attention to itself falls apart like a garden left untended. A place that checks its gates and its drains and its promises can survive a great deal. It is easy to picture an evening now, with the colony settled and the water running and the gates calm. In a small house near the street, a woman ladles stew into a wide bowl and tucks torn bread along the rim. Some olive oil glows in a small dish and takes on the lamp's color because oil loves a little theater. In the courtyard beyond, a pot of basil glows a darker green in the last light. A child leans on the lip of the impluvium and watches a pale star appear inside the rectangle of sky. Down the street, someone sings the end of a work song, the last verse that always winds down into a hum. A dog coughs the way old dogs do when they are settling onto their mat. The mountain looks closer than it did at noon, because mountains do that at night. The next morning, before the sun clears the rooftops, a stall opens near the forum, with a stack of figs that have a thin white bloom on their skin and look as if they have just been brushed by clouds. Across the way, someone reels off a short speech about prices that sounds better than it needs to, because he has a gift for phrasing. A scribe sits with his wax tablets ready and writes a quick line for a man who wants to ask his cousin for help with a cart. The stylus whispers on the smooth surface. A pair of mules go past, their hooves finding every slightly lower spot in the paving and reminding you that even stone wears soft when it is loved enough by traffic. You pick up a jar from a counter and feel how cool the clay stays in the shade, and you imagine keeping it next to your bed at night just to enjoy the texture. This is not a famous moment. No one gives a speech about it. It is the kind of moment that fills 90% of a life, and that is why you care about the city that cradles it. And beneath the surface, beneath the charm of ordinary days, the long story of the land continues to shape choices. Farmers learn the timing of planting and harvest in a climate where rain likes to visit the cooler months and where summer is dry and sweet. They prune vines with a rhythm that feels like a song. They gather olives with a softness that keeps the fruit whole, and they carry them to presses where wooden beams groan in a friendly way. Merchants time shipments to avoid a week of wind that locals know by a name that is not on any calendar. Builders cut blocks in quarries of tufa and lava stone and carry them into the city on carts whose wheels bite their favorite lines into the road. They lay mortar with a craft that makes walls want to last. They use simple tools with names that sound like old friends when you say them aloud. Hammer, chisel, plumb line. A plumb line is not an instrument that demands applause. It is just a weight at the end of a string. But everything straight you will admire in the city leans on that modest authority. Children, born after the colony's founding, know no other arrangement than Rome's careful ways. They count their years by consuls and festivals. They learn to read from letters that are now everywhere, cut in stone, painted on plaster, scratched in quick strokes on public walls, brushed exquisitely in private rooms where bright pictures make gods and gardens share space happily. They visit the forum with their parents and learn to be quiet at the right moments and to speak up when a vote is called for something they can understand. They memorize where the cool spots are at midday and where the warm stones keep a secret reserve of heat in winter. They grow into people who know exactly how long it takes to go from the Herculaneum Gate to the Stabian Baths and how many greetings they will exchange on a normal morning if they walk at their usual pace. It is a kind of knowledge that embeds itself deep in the bones. And when people lose it later, they feel that loss as a physical ache. A last scene for this first chapter. Night again. The city has learned to put itself to bed. A gatekeeper leans his shoulder against a beam and slides it into place. The grain of the wood remembers every night he has done this before, and the sound tells him it is exactly where it needs to be. In the forum, a stray dog circles twice and decides on a spot with perfect certainty. A lamp trembles on a window ledge as a woman shields it with her palm while she pulls the shutter close. The water at a nearby fountain still threads through its spout, steady and thin, a sound like a lullaby written in stone and pressure. The mountain's outline is familiar now, no longer a puzzle, but a shape you would draw by instinct if someone put a piece of charcoal in your hand. It is all very quiet, and if you stand still, you can hear what the city is telling you. It is telling you that being here makes sense. It is telling you that morning will come over the same rooftops, and that there will be bread and tasks and gossip and a line of sunlight creeping along a wall. It is telling you that you are home for the night, and that is enough. The lamp we began with still burns, calmer now. The flame has settled into a small oval of light that breathes as evenly as someone asleep. The clay is warm to the touch. The oil barely stirs. Outside, the Sarno carries its dark mirror past reeds that rustle when a bird lands. Overhead, the sky deepens and pinholes open like stitches. If you listen closely, you may even hear the aqueduct's distant hush. It sounds like a very patient friend. And in that quiet, with the flame steady and the outline of the mountain keeping its watch, the first part of the city's long history rests. The rest waits just beyond the edge of the light. Morning stretches along the stones like a cat finding the warmest patch. The first shutters lift. A broom knocks dust from a threshold. You can hear the city clear its throat. It is a sound made of small things that agree to happen at once. A miller's door opens, and the wood answers with a friendly creak. Somewhere a mule stamps and shakes its harness as if trying on the day for size. Over everything sits that familiar profile of the mountain, blue in the early light, calm and self-contained. Today will be like most days. That is the charm. A day exactly like itself offers a softness you can lean against. We walk down a street where the paving stones are wide and worn to a satiny sheen by years of steps. At the corners, fountains turn on without any drama because water is always awake even when people are still yawning. Each basin is a stone trough with a lip smooth as a river pebble. polished by cups and palms, and a habit of leaning. The spout sings a thin, clear line. You can tell which places love the sound by how many neighbors choose to linger, filling jars, dipping a finger to touch ripples, trading a greeting that is half blessing, half weather report. The water arrived here in the simplest way that feels like magic. It comes by an aqueduct that hides itself across hills and then gives a neat little speech at a distribution tower, sending measured streams into pipes that travel the streets and the houses the way gossip does, fast and reliable. By the time the sun lifts to the height of tall shoulders, bakeries are fully awake. A doorway frames the round haunch of an oven, and the glow of coals laid out like a red necklace. In the workroom, millstones the size of small tables turn in slow, patient circles. Donkeys walk their loops with the air of experts who have no interest in being rushed. Each mill's top stone sits like a collar over the lower stone, and grain dives between them with the soft sound of sand at the shore. Flour collects and floats and settles, and the room smells like warm straw and toast and a promise you can eat. The baker you meet first is already covered in a thin milk of flour from brow to elbows. He draws a blade across dough to mark the loaves, like a signature written by habit. The floor is dusted. A bench carries trays with the faint imprint of yesterday's last loaf. It feels like a space that remembers each morning and offers it to the next. Around the corner, a bar counter waits with its dolia set into the top like wide-mouthed wells. The jars have cooled in the night and hold their temperature with pride. You can tap one with a fingernail and hear a note of clay. When the shutters fold back, the first customers talk as if they have been continuing a conversation while asleep. Bowls clink. A ladle dips into something simple and good. Thick porridge hums with steam. Bread spreads its crisp song across the counter when broken. Garlands of onions and garlic hang near the doorway like little moons. A tiny chalk mark near the hinge counts a tally only the shopkeeper truly understands. The air here smells of oil and pepper, and that bright, salty note that tells you a jar of fish sauce has just been opened with the same care you apply to a favorite book. The maker's stamp on the amphora is a name with weight. In this town, a man named for his craft can send his work further than his feet ever wander. The main street throws a ribbon of light down its center. Stepping stones sit across the width, where carts will later pass with their wheels slicing through the gaps. They are ancient kindnesses, these stones, saving sandals from winter puddles and summer splashes. They turn the road into an instrument people have learned to play. Children use them to hop from square to square as if the city were a board game. Cats use them as islands and own their journeys with cool authority. Every so often, a cart's iron rim grips the same groove it gripped yesterday, and the softest of rumbles travels into your bones. It is oddly reassuring, like listening to a favorite old cart song. We come to the forum as merchants begin to lay out their world. A cloth seller shakes a bolt of wool, and the weave breathes in the light. Beside him, dyed linen shows colors that learn their names from plants and earth. In another corner, bronze objects catch the sun, not gleaming exactly, just offering warmth back, as if metal remembers fire. A maker of scales tests the arms of a balance with a set of weights that have lived their quiet lives wrapped in cloth. The basilica across the way holds its hush like a responsible friend. Inside, footsteps cool to a murmur. Voices drop into thoughtful tones. In the shade, a scribe sits with tablets that feel soft under a stylus and listens to a man explain a small problem that needs a neat sentence to fix it. Outside again, The laughter of a group of young men at the edge of the square lifts and falls like sparrows. The air smells faintly of plaster dust, crushed thyme, and fresh olive wood shavings from a carpenter's yard. Houses open their doors along the side streets, and it is our turn to step indoors. We enter a domus modest in size, the kind of place that is both tidy and alive. From the street, the door swings into a shallow atrium. The roof above is open to the sky, not a large gap, just enough for light and rain to slip through. The pool beneath the opening is low and rectangular, water held like a shard of the sky carried into the house. Its edges are softened by hands that lean and cups that scoop. Today, a small clay jug floats in it to cool before a meal. A shelf nearby holds a little shrine, two dancing household spirits painted with friendly energy. Someone has tucked a sprig of rosemary in a dish as an everyday offering. The floor is a modest mosaic, a pattern that looks simple until you lean close and notice how many small decisions each square made to sit exactly where it rests. From that first space, the rooms open like a hand. A triclinium waits with couches laid below walls, painted in colors that love to be named. There is a red that enjoys company, a yellow that likes afternoon sun, a black that makes everything around it stand up straighter. The painter knew where to place a thin borderline to make space feel tall. In the next room, shelves hold pottery that has returned from many trips to the market and bears the small nicks of service with pride. A tiny bronze lamp holder shaped like a boy in a cap sits near the corner as if ready for night to be lit again. Beyond, a garden square breathes. Vines climb a trellis. A fig leaf as wide as your hand trembles when a sparrow tests it. A basin plays with water that falls and collects and falls again. A private fountain that thinks it is a poet. The peristyle's columns cast a colonnaded shade that makes a hot day reasonable and a cool day luxurious. Now we turn into a grander house to see the city at its most confident. The threshold greets us with a mosaic that announces welcome by asking us to admire its craft. Inside, the atrium opens like a small plaza. The light picks out the polished points in the floor where tesserae catch and throw sparks of day. We pass into a room where an entire world unfolds from tiny stones. On the floor, a battle leaps and pauses. Horses freeze in high motion. A ruler stands braced against a tide of spears, his eye an exact curve. You kneel to see better, and the little pieces blur into brushstrokes and then resolve into faces again. The artist did this with patience, as steady as a heartbeat, and tweezers that must have felt like old friends. The house itself breathes a sense of being at ease with beauty, yet even here, the kitchen smells of real food, and in a back room, a basket waits for mending. In this city, elegance and daily life do not live in separate districts. They share a wall and swap recipes. Back on the street, the business of making continues in 100 forms. The fuller's workshop rattles to life. In one room, wooden frames stretch cloth. In another, vats sit in neat lines, ready for mixtures that clean in and thicken wool. You hear splashing, the rhythm of feet working fabric, the slap and lift like a comforting drum. The scent is strong and practical, a reminder that not all useful tasks smell like lavender. The dyer's shop next door smiles with bowls of color stacked like a painter's dream. A small brazier warms a pot where plant dyes decide how deep they will go today. A boy stirs and watches for a sign only practice can recognize. On a bench, Carefully folded cloth waits for raffle blue, shadow violet, leaf green. Down the lane, a bronze worker hammers a lip for a basin. Each tap sounds thoughtful. His apprentice stands with tongs and learns the way metal moves as if observing a living animal. Sparks hop and fade like tiny traveling stars. The air is pierced with a note that metallic work makes when it is pleased with itself. We pass a perfumer's nook where glass bottles sit like captured dew. A woman lifts the lid of a small box and releases a whisper of cinnamon and resin and roses dried in a dark room until they smelled like memory. She tests a drop on her wrist with a gesture that belongs to every century. Across from her, a cobbler arranges sandals in pairs that convey distinct personalities. There are pairs for men who walk like they own decisions, and pairs for boys who slide into trouble like eels. There are pairs for women who move through the forum like good news, and pairs for women who prefer narrow lanes and stories whispered at gates. The shoemaker's awl winks in the sun. A thread cuts a neat path through thick leather. A lass takes on the character of the foot it was made to serve. At the edge of the city, the amphitheater rests like a giant oval basket woven of stone. It is old for such a structure and handsome without needing flattery. Steps rise and fold around the arena, and corridors breathe cool even at noon. Today, there will be no great spectacle, only the familiar thrum of training. In the shade, men move with a measured speed that says discipline more than display. The sound of wood on wood carries, a thock and a thud, and the soft scrabble of sand. Trainers speak in low voices that know how to get attention without raising themselves. A vendor hums as he checks the straps on a tray that will later hold snacks. An awning crew tests ropes that will, on grand days, unroll a sky of shade over the crowd. The amphitheater has known afternoons when enthusiasm climbed a little too high and bumped its head on common sense. After one such day, the city agreed to quieter months, and the patience that followed did the place good. Now, an event is a festival again, measured and bright, and people arrive thinking of cheering and return home thinking of supper. Across the road, the palestra spreads an open court of earth where boys and men throw balls and argue politely about rules that change depending on who last won. A trainer marks lines in sand with a stick. Under the plane trees, a group of older men sit on benches and do the important work of saying how things used to be done properly. Their laughter is affectionate. A dog wanders through and is greeted like a minor official. From here, if you look back toward the city, rooftops make a pleasing, gentle clutter. You can track the breeze by the way it lifts a laundry line here, then a pine bough there, then a fringe of awning. The baths begin to draw people as the sun moves westward. Try the Stabian baths first, because they are old and know exactly how to make you feel the exhale of time. You enter through a courtyard where muscles stretch and gossip walks beside exercise with its arms folded. Inside, the tepid room holds warmth like a low song. Men sit on benches and talk about the price of figs or the quality of a roof tile with the same seriousness they reserve for politics. In another hall, heat drapes itself across stone in a way that forgives the day's labor. You warm, you rinse, you let a friendly hand work oil into your shoulders and scrape it away with a curved tool that gleams with good intentions. You descend into coolness and rise again, feeling like a page smoothed by a careful hand. Women will take their turns or use their own section, carrying conversation like a fragrant shawl. The baths are not a luxury. They are how a city remembers that people are better to one another when their joints do not ache. Hungry again, you drift toward another counter where a painted sign shows a chicken fat, enough to make your stomach think in numbers. The dolia here hold beans that have surrendered into silk, olives that shine with a green that wants to be tasted, and wine that carries the hillside's geology in its spine. The proprietor wipes the counter with a cloth so clean it squeaks. He tells a small joke he has told every afternoon for a decade, and somehow it remains funny because it is placed exactly right in the day. A child hanging upside down from a stool laughs so hard he hiccups. Somewhere a musician tries 3 notes on a reed pipe, and one of them is exactly the right note and floats up along the street like the smell of something good in a kitchen. We stop now in a house famed among houses. The entrance respects the street with a plain face and then bloomed into riches beyond. A bronze faun dances in the center of a pool, his twist forever happy, his little hand raised as if catching a drop of sun. Beyond, the garden unfolds with a calm that makes the word leisure feel like a blessing rather than idleness. Columns lift and hold a portico. Fragments of sculpture nod at the paths. In a dining room, a wall painting stages a second garden so that guests eating grapes under grapevines can look at painted grapevines while thinking about grapes. It is not excess. It is a kind of affection for the idea of garden, doubled for joy. Walk a little further, and there, set into the floor like a captured story, the great mosaic retells a famous clash with such push and pull that you can almost hear armor murmur and hooves test the sand. You do not need to know the names to feel the current. A king turns and looks backward as if checking whether pride is still exactly behind him. The man facing him leans toward the future with a line of jaw that says the future might listen. In a corner, the tesserae grow tiny as grains, and you think about the hours required, the steady breath, the patience taller than pride. In a smaller house not far away, ordinary grandness takes a different form. The owners have filled rooms with paintings of cupids doing the kinds of tasks grown-ups do. Little winged workers make wine and carry fruit and tangle in garlands and look busy and delighted, like a workshop run by cheerful bees. The household shrine is painted with bright colors that would please any ancestor passing by to check on habits. A storeroom off the peristyle holds jars sunk into the floor to stay cool, their rims rubbed smooth by lines tied around them through many seasons. A doorway in the rear opens to a yard where clay tiles rest against a wall, awaiting the day when a repair will call their names. In stacks like loaves, you can see the city's maintenance schedule written in terracotta. On the walls of shop fronts, messages keep arriving. A neat hand writes the names of men who hope to serve as duoviri or ediles, and sometimes adds a commendation that feels like it was composed with a broom in mind as a pen. It is the voice of a neighbor who says vote for this person because he keeps his promises and does not grumble about drains. Nearby, a line of affection breezes its way into plaster with a scratch of stylus. It is playful and brief, a bit of verse, because even practical cities leave room for the sound of words enjoying one another. Posters appear for performances and for meetings, for sales, and for the dedication of a small altar in a small square that would like company at twilight. Every wall is a notice board, and every notice board is a small portrait of the city thinking out loud. A little way down a quieter lane, a workshop for fine metal stands cool. Bowls with delicate rims line a shelf, each hammered so thin you can guess at the arm that hammered it by how the light moves along the edge. The smith speaks about bronze the way other people speak about weather. He reads its moods, knows when it will be stubborn, and when it will lie down under the hammer with the sigh of metal happiness. On his bench, tiny tools make a formal procession. Files, punches, chisels, a drill bow smooth at the grip from years of palm. He shows you a hinge pin that looks like something the gods would use to close a small door on a cloud. In the doorway stands his mother, counting coins with the speed of someone who will not let craft be cheated by a moment's inattention. Across the street, a wine cellar leans on a counter built from leftover love. Bits of marble from some grander project have been set into the front, a cheerful patchwork that turns scraps into a smile. Amphorae rest behind him, stuck nose down into sand to keep them sure-footed. He offers you a taste poured from a jug into a small cup. The wine is friendly and carries a hint of the slopes that nurture it. He talks of slopes as if they were cousins. This one is windy and stubborn and good for a certain grape. That one is gentle and allows a vine to be lazy in a way that still ends in good decisions. He knows the coolness of cellars by touch alone. He knows which customer likes a little resin and which one pretends not to, but always buys the same jar. For a moment, we step out to the edge of town, where small plots line the road. Kitchen gardens tell you what season you are walking through. Here, beans climb patiently. There, lettuce folds itself into hats of green. A woman with a basket pinches herbs with the authority of one who knows when a sprig has reached its best hour. She hums a little, and the tune flags exactly when she sees a leaf bitten by a caterpillar, a problem she solves with a practiced flick. Beside her, a boy carefully pours water into a line of holes at the base of a trellis, as if feeding a row of polite, thirsty birds. Beyond the gardens, a farmer returns with a cart carrying jars that clink like low bells. He has been to a press where olives let go of what they hold, and the jars now carry liquid light. He will be careful. He will move slowly. He will arrive just before dusk with shoulders tired and a heart good. Clothing in the street is a quiet parade of convenience and pride. Tunics fall to the knee or the ankle, depending on work and weather. Togas appear when the day asks for ceremony and make walking into a considered event. Sandals flash their straps and go on with their day. Women wrap themselves with grace that is part habit, part art. Hair rises in arrangements that look like architecture learned to be soft. A jeweler's window lets you see small gold leaves with a talent for lightness. He shows you a bracelet that pretends to be a snake and a ring that pretends to be a star. He tells you gently that a good jewel is a companion, not a shout. And you think he must know quite a lot about friendship. As afternoon slides toward evening, the city takes on that lovely concentration it gets when tasks are nearly done. In a courtyard, a loom beats its quiet drumbeat, and a line of thread becomes a length of cloth, and then a folded hope. In a kitchen, a mortar taps as garlic submits to kindness. A pot receives chickpeas that have soaked and softened into themselves. A pan learns the shapes of little fish, with flour dust clinging to them, sizzling until they smell like a story about the sea told by someone who loves the shore but prefers to sleep at home. A glass cup set on a table refracts a piece of the garden so that a single leaf appears in it twice. The light balances on the threshold for a minute or two, unsure whether to go or stay, then slips into the street like a cat leaving a room it had decided to ignore. Before the lamps are lit, we take one more walk under the growing blue to look at how the city organizes both dignity and ease. At one gate, a guard rests his back against stone, warmed by the day, and watches swallows draw elegant punctuation marks across the air. He knows the faces that belong to today's story and the faces that belong to another town's story. He greets both with the same professional kindness. In the forum, a pair of magistrates in clean togas speak with a craftsman about a repair to be made on the paving near the eastern colonnade. They nod toward the ground and then toward the treasury and then toward the craftsman's hands, which seems a fair distribution of attention. A little parade drifts by with a small altar carried on shoulders and a flame that smiles and winks at curious children before riding on. A flute finds a note that makes even corners feel rounded. At the amphitheater, a caretaker walks the empty arc and checks ropes at the awning's posts. He stops and looks at the sand and sees nothing but quiet. There are days when the city gathers here for spectacle, for the choreography of courage and training and costumes that make noise of another century. He likes those days, but he also likes this, when an oval of space waits like a lake before wind. He picks up a bit of straw near the edge and finds himself thinking about how much of a day is made of small pieces of straw and sand and routine that fit together so well that the result is called peace. He ties a knot with the kind of care you give to a knot that will be asked to hold up a piece of sky, and he walks on. The last market stalls close with the amiable slap of wood on wood. A money changer counts quietly. A butcher sweeps. A potter turns a cup in his hand and decides its lip is exactly right and puts it on a shelf with a look of relief, as if the cup had been fretting and now can relax. Across the lane, a girl tips a jar at a fountain and lets water run in until the jar hums and then sings because air and water argue for a second about where they belong. She lifts it and carries it into a doorway that gathers her safely. In a window, someone pulls a curtain sweetly, like closing a book. The first lamp opens its little star, and there again is the mountain, now a silhouette cut from the deepest part of dusk. The lamps inside houses make pockets of gold that pool on the floor and then lie down, and the street takes on that feeling of storyless calm that makes you realize the story is exactly this. Somewhere, a tablet receives the last writing of the day, names of people to thank tomorrow, a reminder to buy more oil, a scribble that looks like a joke and will be funny again in the morning. In a corner of a garden, a tiny statue leans toward a fig. On a shelf, a cup breathes cool. The aqueduct's distant hush returns to the ear as if it had simply been waiting around the corner, and the fountain's thin lines play a duet with the occasional soft closing of a door. Of what has this day taught us? That a city is not only walls and famous rooms. It is the way bread looks when cut in a kitchen where someone hums. It is the way a fountain's rim learns the curve of hands. It is the declare of an election notice written in chalk and the whisper of a love line scratched with a pin. It is the formal beauty of a mosaic that remembers a distant field and the informal beauty of a cat asleep beside it. It is the habit of stopping at the baths because you will be kinder after. It is the cheer of an amphitheater after everyone learned how to be gentle with their enthusiasm. It is the antique grace of a shrine and the modern intelligence of a drain that empties exactly where it should. It is 100 skills that never demanded applause and so deserve it all the more. Night thickens. The guardian at the gate slides the bar home and hears in that wooden clunk the sound of the day completing itself. The mountain's shoulder holds the stars without strain. In the courtyard where we stood this morning, the water in the shallow pool catches a slice of moon and keeps it as if safekeeping were a common household task. The lamp on the threshold breathes that even oval light again. The wick is trimmed, the oil is modest, the glow is sufficient. Someone sets down a cup beside it, and the cup casts a shadow like a friendly arch. Sleep comes to the city, not all at once, but in patches, like dew, deciding leaves are worthy. A last laugh slides along a lane. A last mule stamps at a fly. A last scribe blows gently on words and closes the tablet with care. Tomorrow will be much the same, and that is the point. Continuity is a kind of mercy, and this city has learned how to practice it. In that quiet, everything we have seen today folds itself into memory. Millstones turn, counters gleam, fountains murmur, mosaics hold tight their little stones. The amphitheater rests like a sleeping whale. The baths retain warmth as if for safekeeping. The river slides past reeds that bend and whisper. And the mountain, the same mountain we glanced at with every turn, keeps its private counsel and its unblinking kindness. The lamp goes on burning, small and steady, in a room that smells of clean plaster and olives. It draws a soft line around the world and says, "Stay inside this circle for now." The rest of the story can wait until morning. It begins with a thin crack you could cover with a fingertip, a pale line crossing fresh plaster like a spider discovering geometry. Someone runs a thumb along it and decides it is harmless for now, just a reminder that walls are not the only things that move in a city. Then, some morning not long after, the same thumb returns with a trowel and a little tin of wet lime. The trowel is cool. The lime smells faintly of seashells warmed by sun. The hand smooths, feathers, hushes. You can hear the patience in the wrist. This is how a place repairs itself, not with speeches, but with small, accurate motions repeated until peace returns to the surfaces. One year, there is a day when the ground forgets its manners. It does not rage. It lurches and ripples like a great animal shifting under its blanket. Tiles shiver. Doors blink in their frames. At fountains, threads of water dance and scatter, and then remember the straight route and behave. Amphorae, those usually dignified citizens, tap shoulders and trade places on their racks as if trying out new friendships. A baker leans into his oven with a loaf balanced on the peel and feels the arch give a single sigh, and he thinks, well now, that is an opinion. Dogs lift their heads and then decide to lie back down because they trust the floor more than anyone. The moment widens, narrows, ends. Dust loosens from rafters and glows in squares of light. People look at one another with faces that say more in one breath than an hour of conversation. Then the city inhales together and begins the work. The morning after is the color of sifted flour. Doorways hold little drifts of plaster like snow from a story that cannot chill anyone. Neighbors step into the street with brooms and questions and laughter that is mostly nerves leaving the body. In every district, you hear the same sounds at the same time: the clack of a ladder settling, the first hopeful tap of a hammer on a nail to see if the timber likes the idea, the scrape of a shovel as someone clears a walkway, because walking is the first proof that a day can be normal. At corners, magistrates and foremen and people who are both gather to point gently with their hands and make lists with styluses that leave quick, dark lines in wax. Children carry small stacks of tiles very slowly, because the work is serious and because being entrusted with a stack is a promotion worth savoring. In the weeks that follow, the city grows a forest. Poles rise against facades like a stand of reeds. Scaffolding multiplies with a brisk social life, cross-braced and lashed in the vocabulary of men who learned knots as boys and never stopped improving. If a scaffold could run for office, it would likely be elected. At the foot of every structure, tools stand like tame animals, baskets full of tesserae ready to return brightness to floors, coils of rope that smell of hemp and sea, buckets of lime putty skimmed smooth as milk. In sunlit courts, piles of broken tile wait to be transformed into the red, grainy floors that shrug at water and glitter like pomegranate seeds caught in clay. In shady lanes, stacks of bricks lean against walls with the attentive posture of guests who arrived early. Not every repair is grand. Most of them are the good daily kind that wins no applause. A lintel is propped, shaved, settled back into its seat with a soft grin of satisfaction in the carpenter's faces. A wall is stitched with thin ribs of wood so that plaster will lie down and be reasonable. A crack is chased and filled, until the hand holding the trowel knows the wall better than a friend's palm. Some houses choose to lighten their upper floors, replacing heavy stone with timber and brick in patterns that learn to sway and settle rather than split. The city does not announce a new architectural philosophy. It simply adopts a little more flexibility, the way a person does after a long walk followed by a good stretch. Public spaces mend themselves with ceremony and practical love. The basilica receives new attention at the base of its columns, where mortar had frowned and now smooths its expression. Porticos along the forum regain their rhythm as column after column is coaxed back into plumb. A man with a plumb line becomes the quiet authority on site. He holds the string, and the small weight dangles and decides, and around that decision, a street reorganizes itself. The market continues, rearranged for a season. Stalls set up in a courtyard 2 doors away. A fishmonger moves his table closer to a fountain, and everyone agrees this is sensible because water and fish like each other's company. A coughing statue gets dusted and looks as if it is trying not to sneeze. The water system, being a network of shy miracles, needs careful talk. Somewhere uphill, at a castellum where streams divide like polite guests choosing chairs, workers squat to listen to pipes. They sound them with light taps, and the pipes answer with notes. Lead gets new patches that gleam for a day before dulling into the same gray as the old. Wooden mains running under streets receive fresh sections and a pat like a horse before a ride. Fountains, one by one, return to their familiar song. You can tell the moment by the way a widow puts her hand on a spout and nods as if greeting an old friend who has been away and come back with the same humor. Temples receive care with a blend of tenderness and competence that would please gods. If gods are pleased by anything as human as a repair done properly. Men scale scaffolds in soft shoes. They rebed a cornice stone that had considered a different arrangement and decided against it. They repaint a frieze with colors whose names taste good in the mouth. Blue, that remembers the sea. Red, that remembers berries. Yellow, that remembers wheat taken from a field under a friendly sky. In the triangular form, a Doric plainness proves itself a forgiving patient. In the heart of town, the temple to Venus, a favorite of the colony, collects its fragments and rests them where they belong, like a hostess reuniting friends at a banquet who had been scattered in a storm. Meanwhile, private houses decide that necessity is an excellent excuse for a little redecorating. A cracked wall becomes an opportunity for a new panel in a darker tone that hides the memory and makes lamps look handsome by contrast. Borders are reimagined. Small scenes of birds and branches and invented architecture climb out of workshops and settle on plaster with equanimity, as if they had been waiting in the painter's hand for exactly this assignment. In kitchens, shelves are reinforced so jars can sit safely and consider their contents without fear of having to learn to fly. Roofs learn new angles and gain neat rows of replacement tiles whose surfaces for a few weeks shine like fish scales until they remember themselves and grow dignified. Meanwhile, private houses decide that necessity is an excellent excuse for a little redecorating. A cracked wall becomes an opportunity for a new panel in a darker tone that hides the memory and makes lamps look handsome by contrast. Borders are reimagined. Small scenes of birds and branches and invented architecture climb out of workshops and settle on plaster with equanimity, as if they had been waiting in the painter's hand for exactly this assignment. In kitchens, shelves are reinforced so jars can sit safely and consider their contents without fear of having to learn to fly. Roofs learn new angles and gain neat rows of replacement tiles whose surfaces for a few weeks shine like fish scales until they remember themselves and grow dignified. In the quarter of fullers and dyers, nobody had waited to be told what to do. Vats are emptied, cleaned, and refilled with mixtures that make cloth listen. Workers stamp in the tubs with a steady rhythm that would calm a nervous goat. The air stretches from sharp to sharp plus hope, and everyone takes it with the same good humor they used last year. Near the vats, racks of wood hold cloth to dry in sun that understands its responsibilities. The dyer's apprentice, who knows the difference between a blue that wants to sulk and a blue that will be brave on first wash, watches pots with the intense concentration of a temple priest. Every color has its season and its strengths. Today, the shadows in the shop look greener because the day itself decided to be generous. Along the alley of bronze and iron, the earthquake has merely given the metal workers new commissions and a short sermon on the importance of hinges. Hinges multiply. Door pins are replaced. Latches get the sort of attention usually reserved for poetry. A bell that cracked is melted and recast in a mold pressed with a tiny flower, as if to say, everything can be better the second time if you care. Smiths and their apprentices talk about metal, like cooks talk about soup. This one needs more heat. That one is ready. The hammer knows when to be a conversation and when to be a lullaby. An iron clamp hidden in a wall does as much for the public good as any shiny statue, and though it will never be thanked, it fits its place like a word that makes a sentence right. The amphitheater, which had weathered a season of official disapproval after a day of too much enthusiasm, finds itself useful again. Its stone ribs were steadier than some houses during the shaking. A few rows need patching. Ropes are examined with the scrutiny given to things that briefly decide fate. The arena sand is smoothed and again until it looks like the surface of a favorite loaf. Training resumes with the measured kindness of men who know that too much vigor can break more than an amphora. Spectacles return in their own time, learned from the interval how to share space with patience, and the city nods its approval because it enjoys enjoyment best when it sits beside care. On the edges of the city, the road crews stretch the day. Stones loosened by the movement are lifted, their beds are cleared, and they are set back with a thump of conviction. Stepping stones receive a second look to be sure carts will still confess to the proper gap. Milestones are scrubbed because people like to read good news, and nothing says good news like distance behaving. Beyond the walls, farm structures show the same bracing and lightening as in town. Presses for oil are checked for a proper, steady creak. This beam is trued. That peg is replaced. A mill stops for a day while its teeth are inspected for the kinds of flaws that tell stories in the night. Vines shrug off the excitement and return to their arithmetic of tendrils. Figs look down on human activity with their ancient calm. Wheat has nothing to add to the conversation and goes on becoming itself. The forum's loudest voice during this season is paint. Election notices return to walls with the optimism of seeds. They shout and they whisper, because shouting is sometimes impolite in a neighborhood where everyone knows your aunt. Names line up like the start of a parade. Voters are urged to consider men who know drains, who honor the gods, who count money carefully, who don't pick fights with the baker. In smaller writing, 5 friends insist that a certain candidate is decent when it rains. Around the corner, a couplet appears that has nothing to do with elections and everything to do with someone's heart, which apparently still prefers a person who lives near the Nola Gate. On a column in the forum, a neat hand posts a work schedule developed by a mind that finds joy in dividing days into agreeable portions. The list includes repairs, a dedication ceremony, and a visit to the baths because even the busiest list understands balance. A quieter kind of inscription grows indoors. Stone tablets record gifts to temples for repairs, expressions of gratitude that sound like murmured thank yous when read aloud. A pair of brothers dedicate a new altar in honor of a successful rebuilding of a workshop. A freedwoman funds a bench along a shady walk because she likes sitting, and the stone says so in letters that carry a smile. A group of merchants endow a small shrine near the river where boatmen can touch a cool stone before pushing off. The city remembers their gestures. It is how cities repay. Money tightens in some pockets and flows in others, as money will. Builders do well, and so do the sellers of lime and sand and timber. The timber yard becomes a theater of smells. Pine, oak, the sweet sawdust of a trunk that grew with generous rings. Boatmen earn in steady lines hauling loads upriver and down, their shoulders broadening into stories they will tell grandchildren, with good imitations of the sarcastic noise rope makes when it disapproves of a knot. A few grand houses take the opportunity to make their magnificence a little more obvious. They add a colonnade here, a garden wall there, a fresco that stages a garden behind their very real garden because one garden is nice and 2 gardens are philosophy. Many modest homes invest in functionality instead, purchasing a better door, a stronger chest, a new set of nested pots that sit inside one another like a family that understands how to share. The central baths begin to rise with the kind of confidence only a town that has known discomfort can summon. Foundations bite into earth that knows exactly how to carry weight. The plan unfolds like a well-considered speech, moving through warm and hot and cool with assurance. Pillars go up, brickwork stitches between them. The vaulting is the sort that makes a person's eye travel upward and then rest, which is exactly what a tired neck enjoys. Builders hang plumb bobs and swing lines and mutter to stones as if they were students capable of improvement. People come by in the evenings just to stand and look. The sight is gossip, hope, and civic pride in a single parcel. A boy points to a wall and tells his mother that one day steam will slip along it like a silk scarf. She nods because she can picture it and because the day will be here before winter gives up. Commerce continues, after the shaking, with a touch more caution and a hint more ingenuity. The garum makers keep their sauces attentive, their amphorae sealed and stamped and stacked under supervision strict enough to discourage curiosity. Bakers bake, some with kilns repaired, some with new ovens that seem to impart a brighter brown. A few workshops combine under single roofs, sharing labor and laughter. One investor, with an eye for numbers, buys a damaged house and turns it into several small apartments that never lack tenants. And the oldest of the tenants keeps a pot of basil by the door that perfumes the whole close when the air moves. The city adds a skill to its list, managing imperfection. You can see it in the way a chipped threshold is rounded instead of replaced, and nobody trips and no one minds. And in fact, a few people come to prefer the soft spot. Autumn reaches for the vines with a gentle hand. Harvest brings a wave of good fatigue across the countryside that washes into town on carts and in songs. In courtyards, presses sweat and wine foams into depth. The smell is big, cheerful, and complicated enough to quiet any complaints about its persistence. Olive season follows with a softer energy. The mills work, and jars are perfumed with a green note that pairs well with lamps and bread. In the forums and lanes, the talk includes weather, ships, and a small story about a house chicken that learned to drink from the fountain like a person. The story improves with each telling. It will be perfect by midwinter. Mild tremors arrive now and then, like uninvited cousins who learned better manners. People look up, look around, adjust a lamp, and proceed. A mason taps a wall with the back of his knuckles out of habit and then smiles at the sound he expected. Water in basins draws a wavy line and then a straight one. Children who were small in the year of the big shaking grow up believing that the earth clears its throat in exactly this way sometimes, and they are not impressed. Life becomes a steady braid of mending and making. The city wears its scaffolds like jewelry and then takes them off in due time. Religion follows the same rhythm. A little more incense here, a small procession there, a promise that feels like a handshake. Priests of local colleges nod to one another across squares. The household shrines receive a touch more oil at dusk and listen to a minute or two more of gratitude. At the harbors along the lower Sarno, small carved posts receive fresh wreaths for Neptune and Mercury. Boatmen tap a finger to wood and push off with a good word. In a garden behind a house, a quiet statue of a vineyard god keeps watch over a vine that learned to climb again after its trellis forgot itself one afternoon last spring. Education, that home craft that makes the future patient, continues under porticos and inside rooms warmed by storytelling. A teacher draws letters with a blunt reed on a rubbed board and says them aloud as if introducing neighbors. Boys stumble, then catch, then grin. A girl copies numbers that measure out the cost of roof tiles and the price of olives and sees in the neat columns the way a household stands upright. Freedmen and freedwomen who have set up shops learn to sign their names with a flourish that is understandable, because the flourish is not for vanity, but for joy. The walls note their announcements with the same attention they give to senators' names, because plaster is democratic in that way. The years step forward. The city grows into its repairs as if they were always planned. When you walk now, you can play a game of before and after. That lintel better than it used to be. That fresco brighter. That doorway widen to welcome a counter you like very much for its taste in beans. In a few places, rubble piles remain like minor debates not yet resolved. But mostly, the evidence of harm has been translated into the language of use. People do the translating with their hands. The language proves eloquent. Occasionally, a traveler arrives from the north or from across the sea and says he is impressed. He expected a town sulking. He finds a town working. He notices the way the forum gleams after a rain, and the way the new garden wall near the temple wears ivy like a necklace. He longs to know the name of the mason responsible for the patching in the basilica, because the transitions from old to new are so clean he can hardly find them. He has never seen scaffolds so tidy. He takes notes to bring home. He will claim he discovered a secret of resilience, but the secret is not tricky. It is simply getting up and checking the door, then checking the neighbor's door, then fetching a trowel, then making soup, then sleeping, then doing it again. The amphitheater hosts afternoons that feel much the way they felt before the earthquake, only a little more grateful. Shade sails billow. The crowd moves like a tide that knows its beach. Performers go through their steps and salute and collect a noise that sounds different now to those who listen for it. It is not only cheers. It is relief braided with a desire not to waste the day. Across the way, the palestra's bare earth learns to drink a bit more water because someone noticed that the new drainage asks for kindness. Boys throw balls and make rules at a rate unmatched by legislatures. In the house with the little atrium where we paused the other day, the crack we traced with a fingertip is long gone. The wall has been smoothed and repainted a deep tone that flatters each evening's lamp. The impluvium has a new border of plain tiles that make the water's surface look like polished metal. On the shelf near the shrine, someone keeps a sprig of laurel green longer than you would think possible by refreshing its water and saying something to it under the breath each morning. In the rear garden, a repaired fountain returns to its old poem. A small bronze spout, shaped like a theater mask, pours a thin laugh into a bowl, and the bowl accepts the joke with perfect seriousness. At night, if you stand there with your eyes closed, you cannot tell what came first, the water, the garden, or your heartbeat. Further along the street, a new shop has opened that sells odds and ends and small pleasures. Ribbon, needles, a clean slate for children to make their first lists upon. The proprietor has arranged his goods so that everything looks like a small invitation to competence. He uses offcuts of colored stone as a border for his counter and never tires of bragging, gently, that nothing in his shop is useless. He loves to talk about the merits of a good hinge. He swears you could build a city with just hinges and string and patience. He is probably right. Near the river, barges show fresh patchwork on their hulls. Tar warms under the afternoon and releases a smell that every boatman knows as proof against doubt. Men lean their backs to poles and grunt in conversation with the current. The land here shifts a little every decade, polite but firm, and the people who work it do not take offense. They simply move the loading spot a few steps along and mark it with a stake wrapped in fabric, so even a sleepy porter will see it at dawn. Open water, beyond the marsh, remains the same careful friend it has always been, helpful on the right days, ill-tempered on others. The city continues to let the river be its main messenger, reliable, unshowy, steady as a friend who writes in clear hand and mostly keeps to market news. Inside workshops of paint and plaster, a fashion edges toward darker rooms with glossy walls that make lamplight and talk bloom. It is practical after repairs. A deep background hides old lines and makes new scenes float like dreams. Artists paint figures who could be neighbors if you squinted, and gods who could be neighbors if you were in a very good mood. Genres mix. Still lifes pile pears and cups and a piece of bread. With such affection, you expect the painter to put down his brush and eat. Scenes from myth enter quietly and look around to see if anyone minds, then take a seat at the table and pass the olives. A bakery behind a modest counter installs heavier mortars and smarter gears for its mills. Donkeys walk their circles with the mild insistence of specialists. The stones sing a lower song now, and flour sifts to the floor like a fall of soft rain. Somewhere behind an inner door, a sterner routine sets the pace for those who turn the mill by hand, a labor as steady as the tide. The result, crust and crumb, is shared round the city with no label attached to the hours that made it. Bread, like walls, prefers usefulness to chatter. One evening, after months that turned into years, the scaffolds come down one by one. Each removal is a little festival. The street notices the way facades look taller without their wooden lattices. People clap, lightly once. Children run fingers over the places where fresh plaster meets the old and cannot find the seam. The men who set the last brace across their shoulders and carry it away nod to the masonry with the calm of colleagues parting after work. Well done. For a while, the city feels weightless, stripped of its temporary sticks and strings, carrying itself with a new ease. And yet nothing is entirely finished, because nothing living is. A pair of aftershocks months apart remind everyone that a household should always include a broom, a bucket, a coil of rope, and a plan. The plan is simple. Check the lamps, check the neighbors, mind the corners where things like to slip away. Mend in the morning what looks like it wants mending. Rest when the day tells you to. Say thank you to water that still arrives when you ask it to walls that accept another layer of paint, to ovens that take dough into their heat and return it as something better. A last round through the streets under late light shows what the earthquake truly gave the city, if a tremor can be said to give anything. It gave Pompeii a sharper habit of care. Roofs bear new tiles that fit like teeth in a smile. Drains learn to be more precise. Garden walls learn to lean in and listen to climbing things. The basilica learned to wear dignity that can also laugh. The Forum discovered it can move a market with grace and move it back without sulking. The amphitheater learned patience and returned it to the people as a kind of peace during noisy afternoons. Households learned to turn rooms to new uses without losing their souls. The aqueduct learned, or taught everyone anew, that quiet pressure is a form of love. Even the mountain, got a new role in daily conversation. It became the way to explain that not everything is under our feet. Somebody would say, the mountain will do what it does, and we will do what we do, which is build, tend, sing, count, and share. Then someone would pass bread, and someone else would pour wine, and the day would come to a clean conclusion. There is a lamp burning again in our little house with the pool beneath the roof opening. Its light washes the wall we watched at the start of this tale of mending, and the surface holds steady. No line runs across it. No seam betrays what once was. The plaster has learned the shape of evening. The trowel that smoothed it rests on a shelf with a chip in its edge that looks, in this light, like a smile. Outside, scaffolds lean against other houses still, because a city repairs itself in chapters. A ladder rattles as it is lowered to the ground. Someone coughs and then laughs. Somewhere, a fountain threads its silvery sound through the air. Cats inspect the old ruts in the street as if checking the city's memory. The mountain is a darker blue than the sky. That thin crack we began with has become a story, and like many good stories, it ends by becoming invisible, which is to say, folded into the texture of the place. The lamp goes on, making it small, even oval of light. The air smells of wet mortar and basil, and the last warmth of the day slipping from stones. The city, which has learned to mend as naturally as it learned to trade and pray and bake, draws its breath even and long. By the time the wick needs trimming, the walls feel like they have always felt. Exactly yours, exactly here, exactly ready for morning. The day begins with ordinary light. The mountain wears its usual blue, and the city carries on with cups and counters and the quiet pride of having mended what needed mending. Then, near the middle of the day, the sky grows a new shape. It rises straight and then spreads, a tall column that lifts and billows like a stone-colored pine. People pause mid-step, the way you would if a familiar friend suddenly stood up a little too quickly. A few go to doorways. A few climb stairs. Someone shades their eyes with a hand dusted by flour. The air has a taste of chalk and salt. The mountain does not speak. It simply changes the day. Ash begins as a drift that feels almost polite, a pinch on a sleeve, a soft dust on the lip of a jar. It thickens gently at first and then remembers that it is not snow. It warms the skin. It smells of mineral and distance. The sound of the city shifts. Brooms arrive before fear does. People sweep thresholds as if tidiness had power. Shutters close with careful hands. A neighbor ties a door with a length of rope because rope has never failed to be useful. Pumice follows. A rain of stones light enough to float on water, light enough to make a joke about bread you decide not to tell. The first pieces clap on roofs like impatient birds. Then they drum. Then they begin to teach every surface a new rhythm. The light goes strange. Afternoon turns to late afternoon in fewer minutes than usual. In courtyards, garden basins stipple with gray. On streets, stepping stones collect small crowns. Voices pitch lower, as if to keep from disturbing the sky. From the aqueduct spouts, thin lines of water keep their manners. People tilt jars beneath the flow, not because they are thirsty now, but because they might be thirsty later, and habit loves a plan. A woman lifts a small bronze lamp and tests its wick and sets it back down with the same soft care she gives her child's cloak. Somewhere, a baker pulls a last round from an oven and wonders what good it will do, and decides that warmth is always a form of good. By evening, the fall thickens into work. Roofs that once shed winter rain like practiced shoulders now struggle under pumice that piles and settles and piles again. Men climb to the eaves with shovels and push, and the stones slide in small avalanches that sound like a grain store arguing with itself. Ladders thud into place. Courtyards become relief maps. The city, which has always been good at lists, makes new ones. Close the shutters. Clear the roof. Bring water. Bring oil. Bring the little chest with the neat roll of coin. The air glows a dull color you do not have a word for. Somewhere a rooster tries a confused sentence and gives up. Night comes with its lamp already in hand. The sky is not quite dark. It is thick. A few people leave by gates with bundles and neighbors in the quiet that lives on the far edge of decision. They walk slowly because the stepping stones ask for patience, and because pumice clutters the gaps where wheels used to run. Others remain and move in a measured way through rooms that know them well. They pack a jar of olives, a shawl, a tool that fits the hand, a little statue that has always stood on the shelf and listened to wishes. They bank a hearth because that is what you do at night, even when night is not behaving. In the baths, heat receives the last of its guests and sighs into walls that will keep the memory longer than anyone thinks. Toward the deep hours, the mountain sends a different message. The air, already burdened, tightens. The ground speaks once, then again in a low voice that runs through doorposts and bones. From far up the slope, something moves fast and heavy, more wind than wind, more sound than sound. Surges race down, hot and fast and carrying their own darkness. The city, wrapped now in ash and pumice, lies quieter than it has ever lain. Tiles soften and sink. Beams char and hold. Doorways become outlines. Rooms turn into bowls that fill. In that wait, things take their last positions for a very long sleep. A jar on a counter. A loaf cooling on a hearth. A cup turned upside down to keep out dust that arrives anyway. The world narrows to measured breaths, then to silence. Morning finds the sun patient and the city shy. The column on the mountain thins and frays. The air clears and strips. From the gates outward, the land has rearranged itself, as it tends to do when asked to remember its own power. A new ridge where none existed. A shallow fill where a dip was. The river below, courteous as ever, experiments with a slower bend. Above, the line of roofs is no longer a line. Under the new skin, the streets hold steady. Shops still know their corners. A basilica keeps its hush. The forum's paving cools under a blanket that turned the world into a muffled room. Time moves in two directions after such a day. It moves forward, because that is what time does. Fields sprout again. Distant towns blink awake. People ask after relatives who do not answer. It also moves downward, inch by inch, as ash settles and weaves itself tighter, as rain writes a thin crust that grows firm, as spaces fill and hollows seal. This is how preservation begins, not as a plan, but as a sequence of small physical kindnesses. The ash keeps air from doing its usual work of forgetting. The heat dries wood and locks it into charcoal. Walls fall into positions that make sense to gravity and then stay. Seeds in jars, wrapped in ash, rest as if winter were very long. Paint hides and waits. The city grows dark and whole at the same time. What do we know of the day and its season? Sources tell of a sky that stood up like a tree, of ash that fell like very light rain that eventually learned to be heavy, of waves that behaved rudely along the opposite shore. People who watched from afar write later in a clear hand. People here leave quieter clues. A brief note in charcoal, scratched on a wall weeks before, mentions an October day, the sort of thing someone writes when counting deliveries. Charcoal fades in air but rests under ash the way a leaf presses itself into mud and becomes a fossil. Foodstuffs found later whisper autumn too. Nuts in baskets. Fruits that prefer the end of the year. Cloaks with thicker weave. We do not declare certainty. We say likely, and perhaps, and in many houses. We soften our voice where scholars still enjoy their friendly arguments and let the evidence do its slow talk. As for the hours, the fall that begins in afternoon gives most people time to act. The drifts become a trouble as roofs grow tired. The deeper dangers come with the night and the surges, fierce and fast and not possible to outrun in streets that have become heavy to the foot. Those surges do two things at once that matter to history. They still the city, they seal it. In that stilling and sealing, rooms keep their arrangement, objects keep their modest loyalties, and ash shapes itself around what it covers, leaving a negative space that later observers will feel as the shadow of presence. Long after, when the surface cracks under a spade and the underground rooms begin to exhale, careful hands learn to pour liquid plaster into those hollows. When the plaster sets and the ash is brushed away, what emerges are gentle volumes that show where bodies once were. We will meet those forms respectfully in the next part of this story. For now, it is enough to understand the quiet physics that allowed them: heat, ash, time, and the grace of a sealed room. The same grace shelters loaves, still bearing the impress of the baker's cut, and baskets with their weave, and a roll of coins left in a table's shadow, and a small bronze ladle that seems to have continued shining through the dark because it had decided that was its job. Under the new crust, sound changes. The rivers of the city, the aqueduct lines, the fountains, the drains that have always done their work without applause, fall silent. A system that learned patience during the earthquake now rests in a patience so complete it is almost a lesson. In the gardens, vines lie down under a gray coverlet. Fig leaves press flat like hands. In workshops, tools lean where they were last set, a hammer's head just touching the lip of a dish, a brush sleeping on its side, a chisel with a thumb's mark still on the shaft. Across the forum, statues stand blind and clean and suddenly very young. Outside the buried city, days and then seasons return. Sailors talk about the mountain in varying tones depending on how far they are from it. Farmers on the far plain sow and reap. A traveler passing the region points from a safe distance and tells a story he has from a friend who had it from an uncle who saw the cloud from a ship. And the story grows a branch, then another. The mountain keeps its counsel. The people nearby learn to tilt their heads when the wind brings a dry smell. Much later, when picks and plans arrive, we will look again and find rooms waiting with a patience that seems almost human. Think of the city not as ended, but as resting, like dough under a cloth. Think of the mountain as a tutor who used stern methods and then stepped away. Think of the ash as a blanket that is heavy and also kind. The night that followed did not have a moon for those streets. It had depth. It had the weight that produces sleep. We leave the city there for a time, wrapped in waiting. And we let our own breathing copy that calm, steady, and even until the next part lifts the cover and lets the room see sunlight again. Centuries pass. Rain stitches the seasons together. Fields rise and fall under crops tended by people who tell stories about an old city somewhere underfoot. The Sarno keeps sliding along with its calm opinion about time. On the surface, the world learns new rulers and new songs. Beneath, the rooms sleep. Then one day, a spade bites the earth for a practical purpose no grander than cutting a channel. It scrapes, then skitters, then rings against something that answers differently from soil. A man wipes his blade, leans in, and finds paint where dirt should be. Red, black, the exact edge of a line that refuses to be a rock. A flick of knife reveals figures that have been waiting in the dark with the patience of saints. Someone lights a candle. The flame bends and then settles. The first faces of Pompeii look back at a world that has forgotten their names. For now, in this shortened telling, remember the simple sequence: a tall column, a patient fall that becomes too heavy for roofs, a night fast and hot, a morning muffled. Underneath, arrangements fixed not because someone meant to make a museum, but because ash and time together are a careful archivist. We owe that archivist more than we can fit into a single evening's talk. Back in the house, where we have visited before, the one with the pool that catches sky, the last glint on the water is gone, covered by a pale drift that has the quiet of folded linen. On the shelf, a sprig of rosemary lies where a hand left it. The lamp's flame has sketched a final, small oval onto the wall and gone out without fuss. The jar by the door keeps its cool. The air is still, the kind of stillness that makes you hear your own breath and decide to make it slower. Outside, the stepping stones are gentle humps in a new plane. Somewhere beyond, the Sarno experiments with another path and keeps going. Word travels the way it always has, by mouth and letter and pride. The region's rulers take notice. Orders arrive with ribbons and seals, and the sense that a discovery can be useful to a kingdom as well as to curiosity. Tunnels are driven into the buried city like cautious foxes. Lanterns lead the way. Men work by feel, and by the sound their tools make when stone is ready to part. They follow corridors and rooms by instinct, knocking and listening, easing through walls that have not heard a footstep since the ash fell. Every so often, the dark turns into a painted garden, fresh as the day it was brushed, and the lanterns flare as if clearing their throats for company. Eyes get used to the dust. Hands learn to read plaster and brick. A notebook gathers numbers and quick sketches. A cart waits in the sunlit world above, ready to carry what can be carried. In the early years, the work is eager and a little impatient, like a boy who runs ahead on a path and shouts back what he sees without waiting for the grown-ups. Many things are lifted from the tunnels and turned into treasure. Mosaics are cut from floors and ride out on wooden litters. Statues rise through shafts wrapped in cloth, like patients being raised toward air. Fine bronzes blink and squint at daylight. Boxes of small goods pass from hand to hand with the tenderness usually reserved for sleeping children, and sometimes with less patience, because novelty can put a shine on greed. The best pieces take the road to Naples to fill halls that smell of lime wash and beeswax. The city above ground, capital of a kingdom, is proud to display its underground twin as proof that it knows beautiful things when it sees them. Yet among the early diggers is a careful mind who loves plans as much as pretty objects. He stands at the mouth of a tunnel and draws the rooms beyond as if he could see through the earth. He asks for measurements before trophies. He maps. He teaches his crew to step lightly and to think of walls as sentences that must be read in order. He lays out whole quarters on paper, arranging them by proportion and guesswork into something startlingly close to their real alignment. In the dust, with a lamp making a small yellow world around his shoulder, he invents a new habit for old places, to be recorded as places, not just as sources of things. He is not famous at court. He is famous now among those who care about how knowledge is built. A few years later, an inscription surfaces to speak the buried city's name aloud with the dignity of stone. The words, neat and sure, carry the sound of Pompeii across the gap of centuries like a letter finally delivered. There is relief in the reading. People had been calling the find by other names, as if playing a guessing game. Now, the guess acquires a face. Pompeii, said the stone, and the name draws air into halls where no one has breathed since the night the ash fell. Visitors begin to arrive not only from Naples, but from far countries whipped into curiosity by diplomacy, gossip, and the rout of the grand tour. Coaches roll in with dust along their lower panels, and young travelers practicing a look of knowing admiration. They descend with sketchbooks and pencils, with gloves and quotations ready. Some are truly attentive. Some are satisfied after a single wall painting and a good lunch. A few sit on a fallen capital and study a cornice for an hour, tracing its curve into their notebooks with the kind of focus that quiets nerves. Guides lead them along tunnels reinforced with timbers, handing out candles and caution. The visitors stoop and pass through doors that were not the correct size for their age and sees garments of light dust brush their sleeves. They write letters home in the evening light of their inn, comparing this buried city to Rome or Athens, or to whatever ruins had held them last week, and seal the letters with wax that smells like honey and smoke. Meanwhile, the work at the site shifts from tunneling to clearing whole rooms and streets. Halls open to the sky. Courtyards breathe again. The way a house arranges its doorways becomes clear in a way no tunnel could explain. A block of shops emerges, with counters that still hold their jars and with floors that remember the coolness of shade. A small room with a simple shrine keeps its charm, even with the wall cut in two by a shaft, because dignity resides in arrangement as much as in intact surfaces. The diggers learn to lay out spoil in tidy rows and to set up windbreaks that keep dust from drifting back into freshly swept spaces. They learn, above all, the difference between finding and understanding. Back in Naples, the museum grows, first as a collection of marvels, and then as a series of lessons. Rooms curl with mosaics lifted from their old homes and set into new frames that try to respect their origins. In one gallery, a floor becomes a wall so more people can stand and look without stepping on the tiny tessera. In another, bronze vessels sit in glass cases with labels written in a careful hand, each number connected to a little book that tells a visitor how deep in a certain room the vessel was found. The city begins to trust its objects with explanations. Students come to copy the pieces by drawing and by wax impression. Craftspeople study the metalwork and go home to their benches with new ambitions for their own work. The collector leans too close to something small and fine and is gently guided back by a guardian who has learned to step silently and carry the authority of the room in his sleeve. Not every choice of those years looks wise from the future. Some walls are stripped to brighten the museum at the cost of the rooms that wore them. Some statues lose the breath of their original setting when placed in grand halls, whose light is correct, but whose air is different. Yet even in error, the impulse behind the choices is love, and love often learns by breaking a few cups. The better habit grows in parallel. To leave more where it belongs, to protect rooms as rooms, to give a door back its threshold and a garden back its rim, so air and light can behave as they did when the house was alive. By degrees, the dig becomes a kind of gardening. Paths are made, hedges are planted to keep the wind modest. Roofs appear in protective sheets over vulnerable places. The city becomes not only a source, but a patient. Decades turn. A new director arrives with an eye for systems and a very clear preference for order. He walks the site in shoes that do not begrudge dust. He carries a notebook and asks the same quiet four questions everywhere he goes. What is this? Where exactly is it? How does it belong to its neighbors? How will someone find it again? Then he gives the city an address for every threshold and every door. He divides it into regions and blocks and numbers as patiently as a teacher labeling classroom cubbies. He instructs that graffiti, those quick citizen notes in paint and scratch, be copied carefully and read as voices. He forbids casual pocketing of small things and requires that even the humblest tool be registered with the respect one gives to a name. He trains workers not only to dig, but to observe. He cares for context the way a careful cook cares for the sequence of ingredients. Under his hand, another gentle revolution begins. Workers learn to notice hollows in the hardened ash that did not sound like ordinary air. They learn that these spaces can be filled with liquid plaster, a milky mixture poured into emptiness as if offering a drink to a ghost. When the ash shell is later peeled away, the space has become a form, not a body, but the place a body briefly made in the world. The first time one of these forms emerges says, the crew falls quiet without being told. A man's shoulder, the turn of a neck, the line of fingers curled as if holding a small object. It is not a spectacle. It is a kind of listening made visible, the ash showing what it noticed before it set. The director keeps the practice and directs that the forms be treated as citizens returned for a moment to greet the living. Visitors who come after see them and stop speaking for a time, perhaps because respect is the only proper sound in such a room. The site grows an address book and a conscience. The old hunger for marvels is replaced by a patient appetite for information. Diaries of excavations keep more than totals. They keep the weather, the moods of the soil, the small decisions that define a method. Drawings improve. A house's ground plan glides across paper with the grace of a modest dance. Details are rendered carefully. A basket of loom weights lined up along a wall. A soot mark left by a lamp where a person always set it down before lifting a curtain. The way a threshold's wear makes the middle lower than the sides if a family favored a certain path through a doorway. The city, dead in one sense, becomes alive in another, because to be read well is another way of breathing. When the 19th century swells to its fullest, Pompeii becomes a regular station along a route every ambitious traveler claims to tread. The coaches multiply, so do guides and handbooks. Engravers publish views of streets lined with roof lines that are only partly restored, and the open sky above them stands in for ceilings. Men in hats stand in front of houses and pretend not to be proud of their hats. Women press gloved fingers to their lips and shade their eyes to take in the amphitheater's great bowl of quiet. Painters compose canvases where ruins and clouds make a harmony that means something different in every salon that receives the work. A poet sits on a low wall and tells the mountain's outline that it understands a thing or two about patience. The outline keeps its counsel. A new century arrives with its own brisk energy. Directors with trained eyes walk the long street of shops and decide to open it from end to end so people can understand the curve of daily life the way a string understands a bow. Facades are brought back to their learned height. Wooden shutters reappear where hinges say they once stood. Painted signs gain their neighboring doors and counters, and the measured distance between a workshop's bench and its threshold tells stories about labor and sales and the way an afternoon decides how long to be. Photographs fix these works in a light that makes you feel the day's warmth. The street becomes almost noisy in the mind. You can see a boy running with a basket. You can hear a pot set down with the gently theatrical thump that says the soup is ready. During those years, a house with a very old secret in red paint receives new care. Its frescoes wake and regard the present. Figures made of color and line hold their poses with more grace than most living dancers. A meal is staged in a room where the wall stages its own meal. Delicate plates of painted fruit and cups that pour light in slow measures. The city's custodians learn to shield such rooms with eaves and screens without turning them into cases. They learn to let air move and to keep rain from guessing at the seams in the plaster. They accept that routine is the better word for heroism here. Check the drains. Check the roof tiles. Brush away dust, not with vigor, but with patience. It is another kind of right, and just as holy. In the middle of the 20th century, the world shakes again, not from the mountain, but from men. The sight hears distant thunder that is not weather. It learns what shrapnel sounds like when the air first parts for it, and it learns what a silent courtyard feels like the morning after such noise. Some roofs fall, some walls open into rooms that were not inviting them. Teams arrive with boards and tar and the same ferocious gentleness that human beings always summon when a place they love is hurt. They brace, they bind, they sweep, they count, they mourn, they keep going. In the museum at Naples, curators check each case and write neat lists to restore order. Care becomes a stubborn light. When peace lays its hand again, the work resumes with more awareness than before. Conservation becomes a craft with its own books and its own conversations. The idea grows that a ruin is not a dead thing, but a living complexity that needs time, materials, and good attention. Protective covers gain better angles. Water, always a negotiator, is given new paths and asked politely to choose them. There is more no to careless touching and more yes to guided closeness. The little paints that clean a fresco without scolding it become more precise. A wall that once would have been rubbed raw now is invited to stay exactly as it is, even if that means its story includes a scar that speaks of winds and winters. Visitors continue to come, changing their carriage wheels for train tickets, then trains for buses, then buses for feet with good rubber soles. They carry guidebooks, then pamphlets, then screens that glow in their hands like tiny foremen. They arrive in the morning and leave in the afternoon, smelling faintly of dust and pine resin. And the citrus they ate beside a low wall. They take the same photographs everyone has loved to take, because repetition is one of the museum's better teachers. A woman enters the House of the Faun and meets the dancing bronze that presides over the pool. She raises her camera and then lowers it, because the gesture the little figure makes seems to call for eyes, not lenses. A man reads an inscription painted on a wall, the election notice of a citizen who once hoped to serve. Without expecting it, the man feels tender toward the tidy handwriting of another man 2,000 years away. A school group stands in the amphitheater and hums, and the curve of the place makes their hum sound better than they expected, which is a fair lesson in architecture. In Naples, the museum is no longer only grand halls for glory. It is also quiet rooms for thought. In a cool gallery, a mosaic shows a battle held in stillness by millions of tiny pieces. Stand in front of the warriors and their horses and watch how a single stroke of a tiny cube can become the line of a mouth, the tension of a knee, the muscle of a neck about to turn. People come close, then step back, then return like boats grazing a pier and push off again. Elsewhere, everyday objects sit in cases not because they are rare, but because they are faithful. Lamps, ladles, a cookpot with a lip dent smoothed out by a hand now gone, a baby's rattle. These things could make you cry if you let them, so most visitors do not let them, except some do, and then they say the room was too dusty when anyone asks. Through all this, the site keeps learning new ways to tell its story. Scientists read the city with instruments that taste stone without biting it, that see through a wall's skin without opening it. They measure moisture and salt and the rise of temperatures that might make paint sigh and loosen. They bring in small fibers cut from old floors and under a lens find a world of city life in miniature. A fleck of straw from a mattress, a seed from a jar tipped in haste. They walk the streets with tablets not of wax this time, but of glass, and learn that mapping can be done in layers so future menders will know where a line ran under a paving stone. Most importantly, they teach and train, passing the craft to hands younger than their own, with the kind of care a good mason uses when setting a cornerstone. The guiding ethics mature. Context becomes a word that everyone says as if it were a blessing. To take a fresco off a wall is an admission of defeat in some cases and a measured mercy in others. To leave it, protected, is the first hope. The site becomes a school for patience. A flake is reattached. A drip is reroaded. A roof tile is slid back into its neat bed. There is nothing sleepy about this slowness. It is alert. It is the pace that keeps things safe. 1,000 very small choices prevent 1,000 very large regrets. Some curiosities of earlier display are softened by this modern kindness. There were once rooms where visitors giggled or shook their heads at paintings too frank for a prim afternoon, where cases were kept by key, and where the door required a certain expression to open. Now, with context, a wall that once had to be hidden can be understood as part of a city that saw love and laughter and bodies as plainly as we do. The museum tells those stories with regard, not giggles. Respect leans against every label. A long street at the site still performs the same miracle it always did. It makes you see a day as a thread that runs from door to door. This counter given back a shutter. That doorway given back a threshold. This small room, when lit from the left at 11 in the morning, revealing a painted vine that had become shy under years of dim light. Guides learn to lower their voices here because the street already speaks. In the afternoon heat, a conservator walks along the curb with a hand out, not touching, reading with the air the way a harpist might tease a melody from silence. She stops where a shallow salt bloom has risen on a plaster surface like sugar. She marks it in her book. She returns the next day with a poultice the exact consistency of oatmeal and the color of dignity. She applies it with a brush that has never lied. She waits. She lifts. The wall breathes easier. She smiles in the quiet way people smile when they know a small thing mattered. Up on a scaffolding set against a grand room, another conservator with a soft pencil numbers the squares of a protective sheet before gently easing it, one quadrant at a time, from a painted field. The squares look like a patchwork quilt, and for a moment the wall appears dressed for travel. In a courtyard, a mason taps at the brick lining of a drain that has faithfully carried off water since a Roman set it underfoot. He listens. He taps again. He decides on a single brick to replace. He fits the new into the old without drama. A student passing by does not notice. That is the point. Now and then, careful digging resumes where the ground beckons. Not for spectacle, but to solve a problem, to relieve pressure on an old wall, to retrieve a room that would otherwise be lost to the slow compressions of time. When the earth lifts a corner of a painted scene, the team approaches as if to a skittish animal. Shade cloth goes up, misters whisper, brushes tick. The image emerges in tiny acts of gentleness, the wingtip of a bird, the curve of a vine, the edge of a silver bowl painted so cleverly that it seems to catch the light, even in this very different century. When a counter appears, with its jars still nested in their cool mouths, a smile passes along the line of workers. They know the sound of a dolium tapped by a finger. It is the sound of lunch in every language. The city's caretakers write annually of drains cleared, roofs repaired, doors mended, gardens tended, as if sending letters to ancestors. They speak of storms and summers, of a winter that asked for scaffolds, of a spring that brought wildflowers so cheerful along the edges of paved lanes that people stopped to admire them, more than was perhaps efficient for progress. They list new finds in plain terms. A small bronze from a corner of a kitchen. A charred loaf, with the baker's cut still proud on its crown. A fragment of writing that mentions a delivery of oil and a promise to return the amphorae when empty. The lists are steadying. They make the city sound like what it is, a place that continues to be itself under good care. In the museum, a child stands in front of a case filled with tiny glass bottles and leans, and then finally sees that each bottle holds its own little world of bubbles and light trapped by the breath that made it. She looks up at her parent and says, "I think these are like stars." The parent nods and decides not to add a lecture. A scholar, 5 rooms away, bends over a table where shards fit together into a cup so fine that the seam disappears. He writes 3 lines in a notebook, so neat it could shelter bees. He does not use exclamation marks. He does not need them. A guard passes down the hall and stops for a moment in front of the big mosaic, not to guard, but to say good morning, the way one says it to a colleague. The mosaic does not reply. It does not have to. It is present, which is another kind of answer. What is it we are watching over time in this chapter of the city's life? We are watching the invention of a craft that knows how to let the past keep breathing. We began with tunnels and lanterns and the giddy speed of discovery. We moved toward plans and notebooks and the respectful pause before touch. We arrived at a habit of tending made of small, repeated gestures: brush, list, mend, shade, listen, stop, begin again. The city teaches this habit to anyone willing to learn. It teaches that attention is a form of love, and that patience is not a delay, but a method. Let us walk one more time through a street at closing light. The day is ending for visitors. The last groups turn toward the gate. The mountain wears its evening blue, which is a color that refuses to be named and enjoys that refusal. A conservator carries a coil of string, the color of straw, and a stack of notes secured by a wooden clip. A gardener locks a little gate and runs a hand over a laurel that has been shaped into a tidy cloud, whispering something no one hears. A curator steps out of a door and closes it with a click that echoes once along the colonnade and then sits down. A bird tries 3 versions of a call and decides on the first. The air smells faintly of damp stone and fig. We stop in the house we love, where a small pool still waits beneath an opening to the sky. In the 19th century, people stood here with skirts carefully lifted and boots damp with dust and tried to imagine what life had been like. In the 20th, people stood here with cameras that clicked like quick beetles. In the 21st, people stand here with small glowing rectangles and learn that their own faces glow too. But regardless of century, there is always a minute when even the talkative ones fall quiet. The pool holds a square of evening. A single drip trickles from the spout to remind us that water, even when the aqueduct is silent, knows how to keep time inside stone. On the shelf, the shrine keeps its guardians. A sprig of green brightens the corner. The air is still enough that you can hear your breath become part of the room, in and out, as trustworthy as winter returning to spring. This part of the story has been about hands and how they learn. Diggers' hands, plasterers' hands, surveyors' hands measuring without hurry, curators' hands lifting with the kind of strength that feels like gentleness, gardeners' hands brushing dust from time, the hands of visitors tracing the air just above a painting without touching it, the hands of children pointing as if to claim the future. Every hand, in a way, lights a lamp. The flame is a little knowledge, a little skill, and the discipline to shield it from wind while you walk. You set it down at day's end, where another hand can find it tomorrow. The city, which has slept and woken and learned to rest in a new way, glows by these lamps without needing fire. The mountain is still there, a sleeping outline. The river keeps thinking its long thoughts. The museum closes its doors with a click so polite you might think the doors closed themselves out of consideration. A caretaker walks the length of a portico and counts, not to keep numbers, but to keep rhythm. One, two, three. The sound of a key turning is almost too soft to hear. In the garden, a small terracotta bird on a fountain rim watches the day go. It has remained on its perch through spades and storms and scholarship, and will likely remain a while longer. Night arrives, not to hide, but to soothe, and the city that was brought back to light settles into a darkness friendly to old plaster and to the new roofs that guard it. If you were to stand very still beside the forum at this hour, you might imagine you hear paper turning in a distant office, a pencil whispering, a brush breathing across a narrow border. Those are the sounds of care. They are the sounds that keep a place from becoming only a story. They have made this buried city, once found in a stroke of a spade, into a place that can keep teaching gently for as long as the lamps are tended. And so we step back through the gate. The road beyond is modern and patient. Somewhere a bus sighs. Somewhere a swallow finishes a last circuit under the eaves. The mountain holds its shape against a deepening sky. In a quiet room, a conservator puts down her coil of string and her wooden clip and her notes and reaches to trim the wick of a lamp that lives on her desk. The little flame stands, bright and calm, the same shape a Roman flame once took in a house we know. Its light gathers the day into a circle the size of a hand. It asks nothing. It offers enough. Morning at the site begins with keys and birds. A guard turns a lock that learned its click a century ago, and swallows write tiny curves in the air above the gate. The light is soft on the stone. Tools arrive in the arms of conservators who know the feel of this place the way bakers know dough. Brushes in roll-up cloth wraps, a coil of string, a trowel that keeps its edge, a small syringe of lime for persuading cracks to close. Tablets wake in their cases and bloom with plans. The mountain wears its familiar blue, and the path ahead is simple and good. Check the roofs. Listen to the walls. Give the drains a kind word and a broom. It is the sort of morning any city likes, practical and calm. In recent decades, the work has become a rhythm that would make a drummer jealous. After years when funds were thin and storms too bold, a focused program gathered people, training, and materials and pointed them at the quiet emergencies. Roofs that forgot to shed, walls that had grown thirsty, alleys where water scolded instead of flowing. You can see the results on a rainy day. Eaves take the drops in stride. Gutters invite the rush along lines that make sense. Courtyards drink and then settle, pleased. The success is measured less by headlines and more by rooms that still breathe in February. The best kind of achievement here is a ceiling that does not notice the weather and a doorway that stands without sighing. Conservators speak of salt the way sailors speak of wind. The crystals show up where water sneaks in and tries to make art crumble politely. So the work begins early, before harm grows stubborn. A wall that blushes with white is given a cool poultice and time. A painted vine that has lost its grip in one curl is coaxed back with a breath and a brush. New roofs are not shy copies of old ones, but they keep the promise a roof should always keep. There is no glamour in this, which is exactly the point. At Pompeii, the humble craft of maintenance has become a kind of philosophy. Keep the water moving. Keep the sun gentle. Keep the stones speaking. While saving the old, the work sometimes meets something new. A painted counter emerges in a side street, its jars snug in their stone mouths, its panels bright with birds and bowls. The air smells like damp plaster and dust that wants to be history. A room nearby opens on glossy black walls that seem to swallow lamplight and give it back as a quiet glow. A banquet would have looked excellent here. Patterns lean and swirl. In another block, a shrine peeks from a corner, small and serious, with a sprig of green placed by a modern hand out of instinct rather than regulation. Each discovery arrives in the midst of a repair, like a kind sentence interrupting a list, and the crews make room for both. Not all rooms tell sweet stories. A bakery with heavy mills and little daylight suggests hard labor folded into bread. The grooves where wheels turned are deeper than you expect. The floor remembers the weight of bodies and the regular push of power. The lesson is not to flinch, but to read. Bread in the forum is warm and generous. Bread in this room was earned with sweat that did not always belong to those who ate it. A city is honest when it lets both truths stand. The archaeologists say likely, and perhaps, and point to marks, not myths. They speak softly and let a millstone do the talking. New tools have joined old crafts. A small drone hums like a large bee and takes a patient look at roof lines, while a mason studies the same angle from his ladder and nods. Laser scanners paint invisible nets across a wall, so a crack can be measured like a poem, line by line. Sensors no bigger than a walnut sit in corners and listen to temperature and damp and report home at dusk like careful children. Ground radar glides over a courtyard and asks the earth a polite question, and sometimes the earth answers with a faint outline of something that might be a garden bed or a drain laid by a hand long gone. None of this feels like spectacle. It feels like better ears. The museum in Naples keeps its own steady watch. Galleries breathe with fresh light, not harsh. A light that lets tesserae and bronze and glass speak without squinting. A mosaic carries horses that never tire, and people stand every day to watch them still running under glass. Nearby, everyday goods rest in cases with labels that whisper rather than shout. A ladle with a dent smoothed by use. A lamp with its soot still on the lip. A child's small rattle. The grand sits beside the ordinary, and the ordinary often wins. Sometimes the museum sends objects on careful journeys to other cities, and sometimes it sends only their likeness in high detail, because moving a thing is not always the same as sharing it. Either way, the lesson is the same. The past lives in use, not just in shine. Visitors come with shoes that like stone. Mornings bring the soft sound of groups sorting themselves into families, friends, and people who met 5 minutes ago and have already agreed to share a map. Guides hold up a hand, then a phrase, then a line of history that finds the right height for listening without scolding the sunburned. Paths wander in sensible loops that spare the most fragile corners while still letting the city show its face. New routes open as work allows, and old ones rest when needed, the way a good footpath rotates through the seasons to stay kind. Cats choose the warmest edges. Swifts carve arcs in the sky over the amphitheater and make even stone seem capable of flight. The weather, which has always been a negotiator here, has grown more talkative. Winters can pour too much, too fast. Summers sharpen their heat. A roof is now a conversation about storms far away and winds that forget their manners by afternoon. Plants, delighted by ancient mortar, send roots into places that do not want them. So the gardeners and masons work together. A laurel is trimmed into a cloud that shades but does not pry. A gutter gains one more inch of slope and takes that inch very seriously. Tiles are set with the sort of attention you give a child's hand when crossing a busy street. When the wind kicks up off the bay, the city leans a little into it, like a walker in a brisk evening, and keeps going. The casts made from ash hollows remain in quiet rooms, and the rooms remain quiet on purpose. People step in and lower their eyes without being told. The forms are not spectacle now. They are citizens whose names were lost and whose last positions were kept by a careful accident. The guards watch with a special patience here. A child points and then stops pointing and reaches for a parent's hand. A visitor speaks in a voice barely above breath, not because of a sign, but because of something the room itself decides. The lesson is as old as any urn. Respect makes a better companion than curiosity alone. The town around the site lives with it in a practical way. Craftspeople who learned to set terracotta by watching their grandparents now set protective roofing with the same grace. Students come from far and near to practice mending, and the first day they pick up a brush, their hands tremble, and the second day they do not. A bakery in the modern street sells a round loaf scored into 8, and the line at the counter at noon tells you that good shapes outlast empires. Field schools teach careful digging the way dance classes teach posture. You can see who has learned by how they stand beside a wall, shoulders loose, eyes attentive, tools quiet until invited. In reports written each year, the site speaks to the public and to itself. The lists sound like household notes because they are. Roofs adjusted, drains cleared, a wall dried slowly and then let alone. A painted panel given shade, a street treed with young pines to break the wind in the month that tends to chatter. A small find in a small room, a bronze spoon that still knows how to shine, a reconstruction of a door that closes the way wood wants to close. The lists end with a promise, more of the same. The promise is a comfort. Constancy is the real hero here. Not every discovery needs a trumpet. A set of scribbles appears on a wall, and a scholar's smile appears in the archive 2 days later. A garden's footprint shows itself in soil stains so faint that only a camera and a good night's sleep could make them clear. A cupboard's shadow marks the line where bowls once rested, and a restorer decides to stop, to let the ghost of a shelf be shelf enough. This restraint is one of the city's newer arts. Do enough, then no more. Give the past room to whisper. People will hear it. Evening at Pompeii is the best teacher. After visitors leave, the streets warm their cool, and the cool their warmth. A conservator walks with a coil of twine and tucks an end into a pocket as if tying the day closed. The amphitheater holds its ellipse of quiet. The palaestra listens to the last of the swifts. In one house, a pool still sits beneath an opening to the sky and keeps a square of light that changes color by the minute. On a shelf, the household shrine has a fresh sprig someone placed without making a fuss. In another corner, a small jar keeps its cool, and if you place your palm on it, you learn the temperature of stone at dusk. If you step back and look from a good rise, you see the city as both made and mended. Its life now is a braid of care and patience. It knows that discovery can happen during a roof repair, and that a roof repair can be the noblest kind of discovery. It understands that a map is a promise, and that a drain is a philosophy. It has learned to trust good habits, shade the fragile, teach the eager, invite the careful, forgive the wind by being ready for it. The mountain remains itself, blue at morning, ink at night, drawn with the kind of line you would not dare correct. The river bends and reconsiders and bends again. Between them, the city continues, not as a monument, but as a conversation that has learned how to last. Night finds a desk lamp lit in a small office near the gate. Its oval of light rests on a notebook smudged with lime and dust and a margin where someone has drawn a little plan of a roof and written yes beside it. Outside, a fountain threads its thin song. The key turns in the last lock as gently as a fingertip smoothing plaster. The gate closes. The swallows fold their wings. Somewhere a cat claims a warm stone. The city, which once slept under ash and now sleeps under stars, gives the same gift to anyone who listens long enough. It slows the breath. It steadies the heart. It says, tomorrow there will be roofs and drains and paint to quiet, and that is happiness enough. The lamp's light calms, just as a clay lamp once did in a house we know. Its flame the same familiar shape. Its promise exactly unchanged. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return, and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time.